Welcome to meeting number 74 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022, and therefore members can attend in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me. Please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083H and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, December 7th, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of foreign interference and threats to the integrity of democratic institutions, intellectual property, and the Canadian state. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I would like to now welcome our witnesses for the first hour. As individuals, Dean Baxendale, Chief Executive Officer, China Democracy Foundation, and of Optimum Publishing International. We also have Dr. Thomas Junot, Associate Professor, Graduate School of Public and International Affairs, University of Ottawa. And on Zoom, Mr. Andrew Mitrovica, Investigative Reporter. Mr. Baxendale, the floor is yours for a 5-minute opening statement.
Bonjour et merci beaucoup.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me.
I hope to provide additional insights relevant to your investigation and understanding of foreign influence in Canadian elections and other spheres of Canadian society. Today I will speak with two hats. One is Optimum Publishing, CEO, which I published multiple books on human rights abuses by the Chinese Communist Party, espionage operations by the MSS and PLA, and triad organized crime and money laundering in Canada and other nations around the world. During this time, I've learned more than I ever wanted to know about foreign interference in Canadian affairs. The second is as CEO of the China Democracy Fund, whose mission is to defend free speech by academics, journalists who fall prey to the United Front's works, disinformation, and suppression operations in Canada and around the world. Countless people, from the Tibetans to the Uyghurs to people of Hong Kong, have been oppressed, murdered, and seen their culture erased by the CCP. I stand in solidarity with their right for freedom and democracy. I also stand as a defender of democracy here at home. Canada is at a crossroads. We will continue to remain willfully blind to Chinese infiltration into our elections, business, media, and academia. Will we continue to abandon our fellow citizens in the Chinese diaspora to the threats, intimidation, and manipulation, also known as transnational repression? I put to you that we must exercise option 2. If we do not, we risk becoming a captive state, losing our sovereignty and our ability to make decisions in the best interests of our citizens. Today, I'm going to talk about one of the most important threats and tactics used by the CCP called elite capture, the co-opting of leading individuals and public figures to view the actions and goals of the CCP in a positive light, and to advance the pro-PRC positions within their spheres of influence. In some cases, these persons are bribed or blackmailed, but in most cases, they are simply flattered, supported in their careers, or befriended by CCP operatives or agents working on behalf of the United Front. Thus, they become witting or unwitting agents of the CCP. Targets for elite capture fall into 3 categories: already friends, those who are neutral and could be positively predisposed towards the PRC, and then enemies of the state, which would include people like Aaron O'Toole and the suppression operation that was conducted against the Conservatives in the last election. Former Minister and Ambassador to China John McCallum became a poster child for the regime, a dream politician who was successfully co-opted by the CCP. Like many, he fell victim to their special treatment and ultimately came to believe that he was a chosen emissary, and only he could best relate the goals and objectives of the regime in diplomatic circles here in Canada. This was illustrated in Hidden Hand, published by Optima. If we cast our mind back to the 80s, it's easy to see how Western elites were taken in. Over two decades prior, U.S. President Richard Nixon famously visited China as part of an effort to engage the country and make it an ally. The West had a bigger enemy, the former Soviet Union. China was seen both as an economic and geopolitical opportunity. Western leaders either failed to see or willfully ignored the fact that China had its own agenda, deployed not through military might, but through propaganda, economics, and soft power. Carolyn Bartholomew, the chair of the powerful U.S.-China Security and Review Commission in D.C., said they sold us on win-win, and many in the business and academic leaders believed China would reform its treatment of religious and ethnic minorities and liberalize their country and embrace democracy. This was the prevailing academic theory. Apparently naively, they believed the CCP would indeed reform and embrace the ideals of a progressive democracy. She expressed these publicly in a human rights panel that was hosted by MLI, Optimum, and the CDF in 21. But if elites were blind, intelligence agencies were not. Starting in the 90s, CSIS had identified the threats, but the Americans began their own operational investigations. Operation Dragonlord, an American operation focused not only on the U.S., but Canada and Australia. Dragonlord was a multifaceted agency probe by the U.S. intelligence agencies in the late 1990s. These investigated in part in response to the work conducted by the RCMP and CSIS here in Canada. Gary Clement, Brian McAdam, Michel Junot-Katsuya, as well as countless other intelligence agencies were investigating and writing countless reports on the nexus between organized crime, Chinese business tycoons, and the PLA-MSS operations in Canada. The executive brief was obtained by Optimum authors Ina Mitchell and Scott McGregor from a former federal and provincial government lawyer. The U.S. was concerned about national security and the threat emanating directly from Canada. Much later, agencies in Canada identified these linkages and determined that Vancouver had become the North American headquarters for infiltration operations by the Chinese Communist Party. As part of my testimony today, I've submitted the first page of Operation Dragonlord memo. It identifies FBI and NSA case numbers. They were investigating the relationship between the Canadian business leaders Paul Desmarais, Peter Monk, former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, and the Canada-China Business Council, the China International Trade and Investment Corporation, and known heroin kingpin Lo Hee-Sang Han and arms dealer Robert Kwok.
Mr. Baxendale, we're over the 5 minutes. I'm sure that many of the issues that you still had can get addressed during questions and answers. Mr. Junot, I invite you to address the committee for 5 minutes, sir. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So this is the third time in the past month that I appear before a House committee to discuss foreign interference. In each case, I focused my remarks not on the threat, but on possible solutions. My first time at PROC in May, I talked in general terms about how transparency in national security is or should be an essential part of our arsenal to counter foreign interference. My second time at PROC earlier this week, I proposed changes to the architecture and governance of national security in Canada to try to address the structural problems in the interface between intelligence and policy, through, for example, the establishment of a National Security Committee of Cabinet, a stronger role for the NSIA, and specific measures to enhance policy literacy in the intelligence community and intelligence literacy in the policy and political worlds. I also recommended that the government should launch a comprehensive public review of its national security policy. Given the nature of the important work of this committee, I hope in my brief remarks today to dig a bit deeper into some of the transparency issues surrounding national security. This is the focus of some of my academic work. I was also, from 2019 to 2022, the co-chair of the National Security Transparency Advisory Group, which is an independent body that advises the Deputy Minister of Public Safety and the broader intelligence community on how to enhance transparency. We produced 3 reports when I was there, and I think they can be relevant to some of your work. So my starting point, as it was at PROC 3 weeks ago, is that transparency is, or could be, if it were more properly leveraged, a crucial enabler of national security and one of our key assets in the fight against foreign interference. Let me focus quickly on 3 areas in which I think we could very specifically do better. First, given the nature of this committee's work, Canada's access to information system is broken and dysfunctional, and it fails to achieve its objectives. This has several negative implications broadly, but also including on the national security front. It prevents more informed public debate. Yet that would be essential to build national security literacy among Canadians, including parliamentarians. This is an essential component of the societal resilience that is our first line of defense against foreign interference and other threats. This dysfunctionality in the ETHI system is a symptom. It is illustrative of how the government at the political and bureaucratic worlds do not take transparency issues seriously enough. Second, Canada performs very poorly at the level of declassification. That means declassification of historical records, many of which remain locked up for decades for no valid reason. And more generally, as we discussed at PROC and elsewhere, we suffer from an epidemic of overclassification. Again, this acts as an important obstacle to raising awareness among Canadians, including, again, parliamentarians, and an obstacle to better informed public debate, both in terms of understanding the nature of the threats that we face, but also how to mitigate them. It is also, at a more operational level, a major problem inside government. It stymies and slows the flow of information, of crucial information. And again, this amounts to shooting ourselves in the foot because of our inability to enact reforms. Three, and last, there's a need to seriously rethink how the government communicates with Canadians through its public affairs apparatus. There is not enough of a culture of transparency in how this is done. The emphasis too often is on risk minimization. The result, more often than not, is meaningless speaking points, which often miss media deadlines. Again, this is a missed opportunity to better inform Canadians. It can even be counterproductive by feeding cynicism. This is a problem in general, but also from a national security perspective. Often the government communicates with Canadians directly, for example, through social media, but very often the government reaches Canadians through the media, which then plays the role of a transmission belt. By failing to provide the media with as much information as possible, quality information, not boilerplate, in a timely manner, we again miss an opportunity to raise the level of national security literacy. And in trying to counter foreign interference, we should include much more and better engagement with local and ethnic media, not just national media, to reach those vulnerable groups who are targets of foreign interference. We are far too shy in doing this. We should, for example, fight disinformation by flooding the marketplace of ideas with transparency. That is, again, our main advantage against autocracies, including China. Think about how the UK, I think, brilliantly used strategic disclosures of intelligence in the run-up to the war to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is a tool that we massively underuse. So to conclude, 2 points. Transparency is hard. It takes time, it takes human resources, it takes money, it takes effort. But if you think about it in pragmatic as opposed to abstract moral terms, it is an investment that pays off down the road, even if in the short term it is a burden. And second, to finish, change must come from the top. In the absence of political cover, in the absence of political support, the bureaucracy ultimately is limited in what it can do. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Juneau. Right on time. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Mitrovica. You have 5 minutes, sir, to address the committee. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good morning, bonjour. I have not agreed to appear here or at other committees to act as a proxy for any side in what it has devolved into a rabid partisan fixation for or against a public inquiry. Instead, I am here to raise an alarm and say something that might help you and Canadians navigate reports about Chinese interference, a matter that I once spent a lot of time reporting about as an investigative journalist. I'm also doing this in the faint hope that a few of you will actually hear what I have to say and then do something about it. I've been a reporter and writer for almost 40 years. For much of that time, I was an investigative reporter at CTV, CBC, The Globe and Mail, and Walrus magazine. I've written a lot about intelligence services. That work led to a book called Covert Entries, Spies, Lies, and Crimes Inside Canada's Secret Service. It is only one of 2 books of any consequence written about CSIS. My book exposed CSIS for its systemic laziness, nepotism, corruption, racism, lying, and law-breaking that you and other Canadians haven't heard or read much about lately. I am familiar with China's covert influence campaigns. I wrote a series of front-page stories about Chinese influence efforts throughout Canadian society while I was at the Globe and Mail in the late 1990s and early 20s. It's an old story. That reporting culminated in a story about a joint RCMP CSIS probe called Project Sidewinder. Sidewinder was intriguing for several reasons. Its central finding that the PRC was working with triads to infiltrate almost every aspect of Canadian life was so controversial that then CSIS Director Ward Elcock publicly dismissed the probe as in effect crap. A senior CSIS officer then ordered all copies of the report destroyed. A surviving copy of the report made its way to me and subsequently onto the Globe's front page. But here is where my reporting about much of the recent reporting about Chinese influence differ. Sidewinder included the names of a slew of well-known companies, organizations, and high-profile figures that the RCMP and CSIS believed had been compromised by the PRC. At the time, my editors and I agreed that it would be irresponsible to publish their identities, relying solely on a 23-page report, even if it was marked top secret. Here's the other reason why I have agreed to appear. A kind of witch hunt-like hysteria is being ginned up by scoop-thirsty journalists and what is likely a handful of members of Canada's vast and largely unaccountable security intelligence structure. It's dangerous. People's reputations and livelihoods are being damaged. Loyal Canadians of Chinese descent, including one of your colleagues, are being tarred as disloyal to the Maple Leaf. The special rapporteur found that Global TV's egregious allegation about Mr. Hang Dong was categorically false. But Mr. Dong, unfortunately, is not alone. CSIS officers have even accused veteran police officers who have risked their lives to protect the communities and countries they have served honorably for decades of being compromised by the PRC as well. It is shameful. And this and every other committee examining this matter are duty-bound by decency and fairness to finally hold CSIS officers to account for smearing Canadians because of their phantom ties to China. I provided this committee with a copy of a just-published 1,800-word column I wrote that exposes the horror that two brave police officers and proud Canadians have had to endure at the inept hands of CSIS for the past 3 years. I urge you to read it. If you do, we will understand the deep damage CSIS has done to Paul McNamara, an ex-Vancouver police undercover officer, and Peter Merrifield, a serving RCMP officer, and their families. It smacks of guilt by association that makes the innocent appear guilty. What happened to Paul McNamara and Peter Merrifield is evidence that, one, in 2020, a federal court judge ruled that CSIS has, quote, a degree of institutional disregard for, or at the very least, a cavalier institutional approach to, the duty of candor and, regrettably, the rule of law. In other words, CSIS lies and it breaks the law. And two, in February of this year, INSERA issued a report that found that CSIS fails to consider the damage it routinely does to the lives of Canadians and their families it targets. That's why I'm urging this committee and every other committee examining this matter to invite Mr. McNamara and Mr. Merrifield to be witnesses so they can tell you directly about the profound human consequences when CSIS gets it so wrong. If you won't listen to me, then listen to these two wronged police officers who deserve to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitrovica. Thank you all for your opening statements. We're going to go to our questioning now, our 6-minute round, and I will, for the purposes of the witnesses, members of committee have a finite amount of time, lots of questions to be asking about this issue, so if you can keep your answers succinct, we can get more questions and more answers in. And if they do cut you off, it's not that they're rude. They're just aware of that time. So, Mr. Barrett, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Baxendale, you've published several books about Beijing's connections to organized crime and influence operations here in Canada. Have there been repercussions for you personally or for the company for publishing these books?
Absolutely. I've been targeted by the MSS for the better part since I started on this journey a number of years ago. Absolute articles, editorials directed at both me, my authors. Of course, I work with some of the most prominent people in the world, from Benedict Rogers to Dole Kanisa, obviously Sam Cooper, who is just being discredited by the last witness, and many others who have deep knowledge and understanding of what has been going on here in Canada. So yes, I've been a target, and all of my authors are.
We've heard shocking testimony at this committee about Beijing's treatment of diaspora communities here in Canada. Are you able to offer any context or based on your experience of that?
Absolutely. I work very, very closely with the China diaspora communities, the Uyghurs, the Tibetans here in Canada, around the world. I know their stories. I've met with them. I've heard the horrors of deaths inside Xinjiang. I've heard of the disappearances of friends and family members in Hong Kong. And the China diaspora community, who are loyal to democracy and freedom, are sick and tired of listening to politicians and others espouse the virtues of our great relationship with China, and that we should continue on based on the economic opportunities with China. So they're very upset, and they express that to me, and there are voices in my upcoming book as well.
Have you read the Johnston report?
I've read parts of the Johnston report, and I find it interesting, but I do think that both the PMO and CSIS Brass did not provide the actual readout from the meeting with Han Dong.
Does it amount to a whitewash?
I can't say that. I think Mr. Johnson is working in the best interest of trying to bring transparency and process to a very complex issue. Do I think that he is a rapporteur, is in a strong position to speak objectively on the issues and arbitrate? The answer to that is I believe it's difficult given his ties to China.
Based on his ties to China, do you think that that Mr. Johnston's been the subject of elite capture?
I think Mr. Johnson, over his 40-year career, has had a positive predisposition to China and the PRC, in hopes that we could establish economic opportunities and gains for all Canadians, to which I believe they fully subscribed and believed. We have seen that kind of approach as being certainly naive, and it's certainly being countered with countless reports in the United States and the UK and even here in Canada.
Based on your reading of the Johnston report, based on the research that you've done and the folks, as you've mentioned, in the diaspora community that you've met with before, and before the report and up to this point, do you think that there should be a full public inquiry?
Absolutely. This is our national security. The future of democracy is at stake. We need to really investigate and understand it from all different levels. So absolutely a full inquiry should be called.
Are you familiar with the remarks that the question of privilege that Aaron O'Toole raised in Parliament a few days ago?
Yes.
And does that sound consistent? Does what he described sound consistent with how the United Front Work Department operates?
100%. I have countless cases and documents, both declassified information and reports that would support Mr. O'Toole's view.
Well, why would Mr. Johnston have written that in his report that the claims about Mr. O'Toole were hard to believe?
I think he's being given a set of information, a very small team. I don't think he was provided proper access to documents. I think that comment is clearly made based on that information that he's being given. And I think he has not had all of the information, nor did he actually call a number of witnesses that should have been called to testify and to provide them with a counter to what others are saying to him.
Does the government's approach to this amount to a cover-up based on the type of information or the limited amount of information provided to the individual, the special advisor to the Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson?
I think successive governments who have leveraged their relationship with the PRC to their own benefits, it's in everyone's vested interest not to disclose or to bring out, I think, and clean house with respect to this issue.
I've got about 45 seconds left. Can you give us an example, or can you just elaborate with the time remaining on Beijing's influence operations here in Canada?
Beijing's influence operations here in Canada are extensive. Obviously started in the 80s. We have, in the upcoming book, The Mosaic Effect, we chronicle the United Front's infiltration operations on the West Coast, which was ground zero. These include influencing of business leaders. Unfortunately, organized crime often is at the same table, brought in through the United Front, and they are take pictures with photo ops with every political party, and their influence operations are extensive. including into Jenny Kwan's office, which has been going on for over a decade, from my understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Baxendale. Mr. Barrett, Ms. Hepner, you're next for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Mitrovica, we heard a little bit of, I think, disbelief or disagreement from Mr. Baxendale about your opening statement, and in particular, I think an author, Sam Cooper, and I understand he also had some visual reactions to your statements in the room. I'm wondering if you have a reaction to that.
Well, I didn't discredit his reporting. His reporting discredited itself. I'm also astonished to hear the panelist and a Conservative member of Parliament actually suggest that the former Governor General has somehow been compromised by the PRC. This is the kind of hysteria that I alluded to in my statement that is so dangerous to the reputations of loyal Canadians who have worked to serve their communities in this country. It is disgraceful. And I hope that reasonable members of Parliament on this committee just don't accept and reject outright those kind of slimy allegations against loyal Canadians. And this is what I have written about and cautioned and warned not only members of this committee, but other committees and Canadians more generally, just to really reject these kind of insinuations that began in 2010 with Richard Fadden and his testimony or a speech that he gave at the time that was discredited, but ironically, by the Globe and Mail, who called his remarks foolish and reckless, and that he had to walk back later on. So I'm just astonished that a Conservative member of Parliament would infer that the former Governor General of Canada is somehow compromised by the PRC. This is the ugliness that this stuff is the gutter. It really is the gutter.
You say ironically exposed by the Globe and Mail, and I expect that you're talking about many of your writings recently have been critical of media reports that have reported on foreign interference. You say, because a piece of paperwork churned out by an information officer with a CSIS badge is marked with any sort of security classification does not make it true. Would you explain to this committee maybe the difference between evidence and intelligence and why it's important to make that distinction?
This is absolutely a crucial point that I have made before other committees, and hopefully that it will register with this committee as well. Intelligence officers produce information, and that information can be embellished, it can be edited, it's oftentimes, and this is something that Mr. Johnson found in his report, it's not corroborated, and it can be twisted to create a narrative that leads to the kind of statements that the other panelists made, that Chinese influence poses an existential threat to Canadian democracy. This is the kind of hyperbole that really reasonable people, serious people, kind of reject. Let me give you an example of what I'm saying. And this might be of interest to the Conservative members of Parliament who have not asked me a question about any of these matters in the 3 appearances that I've made before PROC and this committee. Now, during his tenure as Prime Minister, Stephen Harper visited China 3 times. He negotiated FIPA, which is the largest bilateral trade deal since NAFTA, which was a trilateral trade deal, okay? He also negotiated a customs intelligence exchange program with China. Now, if I were a CSIS officer, a conspiracy theory CSIS officer, or a writer for the other panelists, I could connect those dots and create a narrative that Mr. Harper was somehow compromised by the PRC. Of course, that is an outrageous allegation, because I have more respect for Mr. Harper's, even though I don't agree, and I've written critically about him, I have respect for the commitment that he's made to this country. And so this is how information can be distorted to create a narrative, and it is not evidence. It is not tested. And this is the problem that has occurred with the media. They're taking bits of information that have been leaked to them out of context, and this is what Mr. Johnson makes, and I think he makes a reasonable point, because unlike the other panelists, he's a serious man who is approaching this subject matter seriously, and he made the point that the media reports are based on questionable information that has been taken out of context. Let me go back to finally. I know
you've got 3 seconds, sir.
Okay, please hear me. Invite Mr. McNamara and Mr. Merrifield, an RCMP officer and the Vancouver Police Department undercover officer, to appear here.
Thank you, Mr. Mitrovica. We just for the committee's benefit, we have received correspondence from both the gentlemen that he referred to. It's in translation, and it will be distributed as soon as it's translated. So, Monsieur Villemur, vous avez...
Monsieur Villemur, you have 6 minutes, please. Thank you to all the witnesses. Mr. Beckendale, you mentioned multiple times, Baxendale rather, you stated that heads of state were influenced by different countries, and today we're talking about China. There was the agreement in 2013, a military agreement, 2014, commercial reciprocity, but you mentioned the Memorandum of Understanding between Canada and China. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Yes, under the Harper government, a number of MOUs were entered into directly with the RCMP. This allowed some 25 agents of Chinese Communist, well, we'll call them policing agents, to enter the country to look at repatriating supposed criminals from Canada, to which a number were deported during that period of time of about 290, as well as 2,900 citizens were influenced, shall we say, or it was suggested it would be in their best interest if they came back to China because some of their family members were being threatened by the regime. So the MOUs which exist and are reported within our book upcoming, I think these speak for themselves very, very, very clearly.
Are these memoranda the start of Chinese police offices in Canada? Or at least the one that we just talked about?
Yes. So the operations for surveilling and suppressing the China diaspora community has been going on for the better part of two decades in a organized fashion. And so this continues today. The police stations, which we were very aware of, the first test cases started in South Africa, where they rolled out operations within Cape Town. So this is a global phenomenon, as we know. In the United States recently, the U.S. actually charged a Chinese police officer in New York with respect to their suppression. That person was trained, by the way, at the British Columbia Institute of Justice, along with many other PRC police officers who are now working around the world, understanding Canadian and U.S. Policing techniques and using those effectively to then engage citizens to which the Chinese Communist Party wishes to suppress.
Can you tell us more about Operation Dragon Lord?
Very simply, it was a joint agency task force, according to the document that we have reviewed, and that Operation Dragon Lord sits within the repository of documents at the CIA. And I would encourage members here to look at talking to the American counterparts and actually seeing if they can actually get access to the Operation Dragonlord report. So far, FOIAs for the report have been rebuffed, and I trust that's because there is sensitive information with respect to former business and political elite in the United States. I would like to clarify, though, that I'm not suggesting that Mr. Johnson is co-opted by the Chinese Communist Party. I'm simply, in the question and answering of the question, I suggested that Mr. Johnson is certainly positively predisposed, as were many of us, towards the Chinese Communist Party, including myself, for many years.
Can you tell us more as well on elite capture, please?
So elite capture, which is a process that the Chinese Communist Party deploys through its United Front Works Department, which has 44,000 employees around the world. Operationally here in Canada is significant. These are through the friendship associations. Obviously, one could suggest that those individuals and those organizations are here to create cultural ties with Canada and to create harmonious relationships with all of us. I think this is indeed part of their operation. However, the United Front works in their disinformation, misinformation operations inside Canada. The PRC controls 56 or has effective control of 56 media outlets in the country. And elite capture is done in a number of different ways. In most cases, it is aligning personal interests with that of a positive relationship, win-win for Canada and with the PRC.
Do you believe that Operation Dragonlord was taken seriously enough by Canadian authorities?
Well, first of all, Operation Dragonlord was not known to Canadian authorities until we broke it in Washington with the CBC in March of this year. Once again, I have no reason to believe that Operation Dragonlord, or whatever form it is in today, has continued on. Canadian politicians and business leaders and their ties with China have been continued to be surveilled by U.S. intelligence agencies continuously because of the potential national security threat to the United States and to the Five Eyes.
Do you believe that prime ministers over the last 30 years were all approached or influenced by China, or at least attempted to be influenced?
I think, as Michel Junot-Katsuya made clear after the break of the Operation Dragonlord, which he confirmed that such investigations were taking place, that he stated that every prime minister has been influenced by the PRC over the past 40 years and have been in one way or another compromised by people who are close to the Prime Minister or within the apparatus of government.
Thank you. Merci, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Monsieur Villemur.
Le prochain intervenant.
Our next question from Mr. Green.
You have 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses who are present here today. Like you, Professor Juneau, I also am interested in finding some solutions, and I know that you've provided that other committees, and I'm hopeful that we can get back to that space as a committee to be able to provide recommendation, hopefully to prevent any type of future instances like this occurring. So, Professor Juneau, you stated that after the 2016 U.S. election, that there was a fear that Canada needed to take the issue of foreign interference more seriously. Do you believe that Canada has adequately prioritized addressing foreign interference since then?
I think that the country as a whole does not take foreign interference seriously enough. That's something that I said, including, I think, when you were there in a couple other committees, including the Canada-China one a while back. So, no, not seriously enough. And
in a CBC article, you stated that the existing critical election incident public protocol is problematic. Can you describe why the protocol is problematic?
I don't recall saying that. Could you elaborate?
It was a CBC article that we had flagged talking about the CEIPP. Are you familiar with the critical election incident protocol?
I am. I'm not sure what I said in saying that it is problematic. I have said that it should be more transparent in its work, but that the basic idea of the protocol, I think, is correct, is appropriate.
Okay. So in your opinion, what would be the ideal solution for determining whether interference in an election had occurred and whether the public should be notified?
I remember which article you're referring to. One thing that I did say was the issue of a threshold. The current system indicates that above a certain threshold, a panel of deputy ministers and senior public service officials would then speak out on an issue of interference. There is a tension here in the sense that for unelected public officials to make a public statement in the context of an electoral campaign about something as sensitive as this is uncomfortable, and I think nobody should find that this is an ideal solution. That being said, I do think that the system as a whole of the protocol and the task force is the right one. What I did say in that article was that there should be more transparency, not only about the nature of the system, what are the criteria, what is the threshold above which there is a public intervention, and that overall, even below the threshold, even if it has to be after the election, there should be more transparency about it.
Professor, we're in a minority government, and we've had 2 elections over the last 3 years. What message would you want to give those responsible for free and fair elections in Canada about the urgency on a move forward basis? What would be your kind of immediate steps to help us safeguard not just the electoral process, but also the public's confidence in the electoral process?
It's a good question. I think that a number of steps, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but more transparency on the part of the government at the political level, but also at the bureaucratic level, to better communicate with Canadians what the nature of the threat is and what is being done to mitigate that threat. I think that when the information comes from the political level, of course, there's always an issue of trust, that it will be perceived, often rightly, by many Canadians as being politicized, and that is part of the challenge. That's why some of the information has to come from the bureaucratic side. But when that happens, the challenge is that it can be perceived by some as interference, for lack of a better word, in an electoral campaign by security services, which is not something that is ideal either. That being said, I think that right now the debate on these issues is very polarized, as if anything we're seeing today, where on the one hand, some people, I think, make exaggerated statements on Canada, the survival of Canada's democracy being at stake, which I don't think is the case. But on the other side, you have other statements whereby the threat of foreign interference is dismissed, which I think underestimates the threat. So there is a need on the part, I think, of government officials to be much more transparent, to provide a balanced view of, yes, there's a problem, it's a real problem, but being as accurate and balanced as possible.
Have you contemplated, because you've talked about transparency a lot, and I appreciate your message discipline on that topic, but you also referenced ways in which we could be mitigating this. And I'm keenly interested if you've contemplated from your perspective things administratively, legally, from a security standpoint, from a social standpoint, beyond the transparency, because the transparency tells me that the action's already underway and has happened. How do we safeguard against it? Do you have any opinion on that?
I would go back to some of the key points that I mentioned on Tuesday at PROC. I think there is a serious need for governance reform of the national security apparatus to be able to better deal with these threats, putting aside, as you said, the transparency dimension. We need a National Security Committee of Cabinet to focus high-level political debate on national security issues, which is not the case right now. We need a stronger bureaucratic apparatus to support that committee, which has to mean a stronger national security and intelligence advisor to the PM in PCO. We need reforms on the human resources level, which bores everybody out of their minds, but is essential because the human resource, the human capital dimension of all this is very challenging in the government right now.
You're talking about recruitment and screening specifically?
Every level. There are problems with recruitment, there are problems with retention, there are problems with security clearances, with massive backlogs, there are problems with career paths, and so on.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Green. That concludes our first round. Second round's going to start. We'll get 5-5, 2.5, 2.5. We're going to start with Mr. Baird, I understand. Après ça, on va aller Monsieur Gord.
And then Mr. Gord.
Between the two of you, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Mitrovica talked about gutter comments, of which he's very well acquainted. He's written columns filled with disgusting anti-Semitic tropes. He's written columns including lies about Jews murdering Christian children in Europe, and he's compared the men and women who served in the IDF to being members of the mob. So I certainly didn't add him to the witness list today. I have no lessons to take from him, and I have no questions for him. I'll return the time to Mr. Gord, please.
Okay,
Thanks.
Monsieur Gord, vous avez 4.
Mr. Gord, you have 4 minutes and 4 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for all the witnesses. Many witnesses, and some from this morning, that there is political interference and has been for at least 30 years. And we're focused on interference during an election period. And the Canadian government was in a weakened state. There are fewer services to MPs during that time, and ministers have limited access and limited capacities. So Canada is weakened for about 30 to 40 days, and I think that actors of foreign interference are well aware of that, and they benefited from that. Election laws in Canada are there to protect Canadians against irregularities, but it doesn't protect against international efforts against Canada. And in light of all of these weaknesses, and there's not necessarily a mechanism that allows Election Canada to stop an election, even if they're aware of interference, whether it be general or partial in certain ridings, even if they have proof. And in a short time frame, it's hard to prove that interference. It takes longer investigations, but in that period of 30 to 45 days, even if people think that there's interference, they can't prove it, and so Election Canada has to go on with the election. In your view, what mechanism could be implemented, knowing that there's almost certainly interference during an election period, in order to ensure that we have a fair process? Mr. Junot? That's a very good question, and thank you for raising it here. The first thing to say, and I trust Mr. Judd and Mr. Rosenberg's reports on the work done during the last elections. The integrity of the elections were threatened. What can be done during an election campaign when it becomes very difficult for politicians to act? Well, that's, as we stated a little bit with Mr. Green, it's a very uncomfortable situation. We don't want politicians to have to speak publicly during an election campaign because it'll be perceived as being partisan, and rightfully so. And then there's the public service that is very uncomfortable with reacting publicly during a campaign. Where there's work to be done has to be the threshold. What will be the threshold that needs to be met? Where there would be a committee of deputy ministers and others who would act publicly. That threshold perhaps is too high right now. It needs to be lowered, but not too much, because then, in that case, there would be a public intervention that would be too frequent. And I'll repeat a little bit what was said earlier. Canadians need to understand better how the system works, why things are done in a certain way, and that requires awareness raising, and it needs to include MPs who are not currently sufficiently informed to act as spokespersons as well. we have 3 seconds left, so perhaps at the next turn. And perhaps if the witnesses have anything to add, they can do it in writing.
To Mr. Gord's question, please submit them to the committee. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Baines. You have 5 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today for this very important study. To Monsieur Junot, when you appeared before PROC, you identified challenges in recruitment and retention, and I believe you mentioned it towards the end there in one of my colleagues' questions. For Canada's security agencies. We also heard from other witnesses before that in previous testimony that CSIS does a poor job of recruiting diverse people from diverse diasporas within Canada. So what do you believe are the root challenges or causes of these challenges? Is there a culture factor that we need to consider? And we've heard about racism and things like that you've also mentioned.
Thank you for your question. Just as a preamble, if you are interested in that, I would recommend 2 sources that are especially interesting and that go very much in depth on these issues. NSI COP's annual report, and I'm not sure that I get the year correct. I think it might be 2019, but it may not be that year, has a full chapter on diversity in the intelligence community, and it is very well done. It is one of the best things I've read on that issue from any source, academic, government, or otherwise. And the second source is the National Security Transparency Advisory Group, which I used to co-chair, which I mentioned in my remarks. Our 3rd annual report, published just about a year ago now, focused very much on engagement by the intelligence community with minority communities in Canada to tackle very much in detail the issues that you raised. I want to emphasize that debates on diversity in the intelligence and national security community have become very politicized, like a lot of other debates, and are often viewed in these terms. But I think, and I understand why that's the case, but diversity in the intelligence community, in the armed forces for that matter, has to be viewed in operational and pragmatic terms, whereby it's an operational necessity. And when these services are not diverse, they shoot themselves in the foot. They close off large sectors of the population from recruitment. They are not able to achieve certain functions, whether it's civil-military relations on the military side, gaining information and recruiting human sources in certain communities on the intelligence side, and so on. It is mission critical to be diverse for these organizations. And today, I think they are doing a much better job, CSIS, RCMP, CBSA, than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when the situation was abysmal. But there is still a lot of progress to do. That progress is unequal. CSC is ahead, I think, of several others. RCMP, CBSA have more catching up to do. How to improve that? Engagement. They need to go out there with effective engagement units that are able to reach out to Chinese Canadian, Iranian Canadian, Indian Canadian, Saudi Canadian communities, build trust, open channels of communication, not only to get information on threats, to communicate information on how to mitigate those threats, but also by building that trust, by building that brand, to be able to better recruit, because all these things are connected.
Mr. Baines, may I answer that question that you've raised?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Juno talks in the abstract. I've spoken to intelligence officers, many intelligence officers at CSIS directly. I'll tell you why they're having trouble recruiting and retaining CSIS officers. The job is stupefyingly boring. Okay, that's the fact of it. You enter CSIS with this impression that you're going to be doing counterintelligence, counterterrorism, and you spend the first perhaps 2 or 3 years doing security clearance reviews after security clearance reviews, and after a while it becomes mind-numbing. Okay, that's just the fact on the ground. Professor Juno can go on and on and on about the abstract. I'm talking to you, having talked to many CSIS officers.
Thank you, Mr. Mitrovic. I don't mean to cut you off. I have one more question. We have limited time. So going back to Monsieur Junot for one more, back in March, in the CBC, you stated that Canada already does a fair bit to counter foreign interference. But I do think that we can do more. Can you expand on what should the government do?
So I think that if I have the right article that you're referring to, I was responding to a comment whereby somebody said the government does nothing to counter foreign interference, which I thought was just nonsense. The government does things. I think it should do a lot more. It's just to say the nothing part is nonsense. Concretely, what should it do more? I think it goes at every level. It goes at the political level in terms of taking it more seriously, more resources, more, basically everything I said in the previous question. I think I have to.
Thank you, Mr. Juneau, for recognizing that. Monsieur Villemur, 2 minutes et demi, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur Villemur, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2.5 minutes, that's not a lot of time. I want to confirm something with Mr. Baxendale before going to you, Mr. Juneau. You mentioned that there are Canadian citizens that were forcefully repatriated to China. Is that the case?
That is absolutely the case.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Juneau, we talk a lot about transparency because things are obscure and it's used to hide certain things. We heard in this committee the need for declassification of many documents. But I would like to know, how can we facilitate Canadians' understanding of the current situation? Because there are a lot of things circulating, and they're very vast. So what would your recommendations be to better inform Canadians? Thank you for your question. This is something that interests me. I think that one of the biggest problems that we have in Canada is collective literacy on national security, and it's low, which can be good. It has to do with our safe geographical position. That's a bit of a luxury, but with threats developing against Canada by China, other countries, cyber security issues, cyber espionage, we have work to do. But that low literacy level makes public debate more difficult and means that there's not enough public pressure to change things. How to improve the situation? There needs to be more transparency. As I've stated, there needs to be more engagement with the media, and I really want to focus on this. The government, politically and bureaucratically, needs to do more in communicating quality information to the media, national media, local media, and that's not being done very well. Microphone. That's a good point. If there's a lack of literacy, it causes a problem, doesn't it? And we're dealing with the chicken and the egg here. And the best tool against disinformation is information. In a democracy, that is our strength against autocracies that are built on lies. And so we need to flood the market with transparency and quality information. Thank you, Mr. Juneau. Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
Mr. Green, finally, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd have to say that in my time on these committees, I'm not quite sure that I've witnessed the type of attack on a witness that I've witnessed here today. And I think that out of courtesy, I'm going to provide Mr. Mitrovica the opportunity to respond to what I could only say was a fairly defamatory attack on his character. So I will use my time to allow the witness to respond to that from the defamatory attack from the Conservative member, if he so chooses.
You're on mute, Mr. Mitrovica.
One has to consider the source, so I'll leave it at that. I just want to ask the committee to listen to what I had to say. Invite Paul McNamara here. Invite Peter Merrifield here.
Okay, I got 1 more minute left. We do have that on the record. We don't need to repeat it on the record.
Okay. All right, let me go back
you
to
said
the
that
question
you stated
you
that
asked me.
sorry, sir.
Hang on, Mr. Green, your time. Go ahead, sir. Mr. Green.
Thank you. You stated that the media coverage of China's foreign interference is hypocritical, given Canada's history on foreign interference. Can you expand on this?
You're asking me?
Yes, sir.
Well, it's hypocritical because I think that I made mention of this in an article when Chrystia Freeland stood beside Herbaus, the former president of Brazil, and tried to overthrow a duly elected government in Venezuela. And the columnists and reporters in Canada praised her for injecting Canada directly into the sovereignty of a sovereign country. And so when we do it, it's to be applauded. When another bad actor does it, it's to be condemned. So there is a inherent democracy, a hypocrisy in that attitude that I think needs to be at least acknowledged, although it's not going to be accepted by, I suspect, several members of this committee.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mitrovica. Thank you, Mr. Green. That concludes our first panel. I want to thank all our witnesses for appearing today on behalf of the committee and on behalf of Canadians. We're going to suspend for a couple of minutes to set up for our next panel. We'll be back likely in 5. Resuming our meeting with our second panel, I'd like to now welcome our witnesses for the second hour today. As individuals, we've got Dr. Diane Adam, the former Vice Chair of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation Board of Directors. We've got Dr. Ginger Gibson, who's a director of the Firelight Group, and Madeline Redfern. And Dr. Gibson, I see, is on Zoom. Dr. Adam, the floor is yours for a 5-minute opening statement. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Returning to testify before a parliamentary committee brings back fond memories of my time on Parliament Hill, not as a member of Parliament, of course, but as an officer of Parliament, most notably as Commissioner of Official Languages, a position that I held from 1999 to 2006. This morning, I'm going to devote these few minutes of introduction allotted to me to present a brief history of my involvement with the Trudeau Foundation. I've been involved with the Foundation since 2008, when I joined the Foundation community as a mentor to 2 PhD students who are now full professors at Quebec universities. I then continued my involvement with the Foundation's Alumni Society, serving as the Society's vice president until 2015. The Trudeau Foundation then approached me to participate in the selection committee for the new president and CEO in 2018, then chaired by Board Chair John McCall-McBain. The committee's successful candidate was Pascal Fournier, who I think you've already met. I subsequently had the privilege of participating in the advisory committee for the revision of the strategic plan chaired by Ms. Fournier. The results of this colossal exercise led by the new CEO across the country has truly refocused the Foundation's programs and operations on a completely new path centered, among other things, on committed leadership, diversity, and inclusion. In May 2020, I was invited to join the board of directors by then-chair Patrick Pichette, and subsequently appointed vice chair of the board in March 2021, as well as a member of the Foundation's executive committee. I also sat on the Strategic Advisory Committee responsible for choosing the scientific cycles, language, culture and identity for the 2021 cohort, world economies for the 2022 cohort, and the future of foreign policy for the 2023 cohort. And more recently, on the Governance Committee responsible for policies and sound governance. I also sat on the Selection Committee for mentors and fellows for 2022 and 2023. So that's a brief summary of my involvement with the Foundation, the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, over the past 15 years. In closing, I would like to emphasize that I fully support the mission and values of this foundation, particularly since the transformation of the programs and management policies developed under the remarkable leadership of Ms. Pascale Fournier. And I'm sorry that a governance crisis led to her abrupt departure and that of the Director of Finance, as well as my resignation from the Board of Directors and those of 7 other fellow board members. I remain, however, a member of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation community by virtue of my status as a former mentor. Thank you for your attention, and I remain available to answer any questions you may have to the best of my knowledge on the subject currently under study by your committee. Thank you. Thank you for your opening remarks, Dr. Adam.
La prochaine. Dr. Gibson on Zoom. Dr. Gibson, you have 5 minutes to address the committee. Please go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm coming to you this morning from Treaty 6 territory. My name is Dr. Ginger Gibson. I just want to, just as my colleague just did, give you some context for who I am. I was very fortunate to be a scholar in 2003. So I was selected by the Trudeau Foundation as a scholar to complete my PhD doctoral research. I completed that, and then years later, I became a director. I was offered, requested to become a director and a board member, and I served on the Trudeau Foundation as a board member and a director for 3 years. I apologize for not being there in person today. I had a loss in the family this week, and with existing commitments and that loss, it made it impossible for me to travel. I mean, no disrespect. I'm very grateful to be called and eager for your questions. I hold the Trudeau Foundation in the highest respect. I have served on 2 committees. I served on 2 of the student selection committees for the past 2 years. In 2022, 2021, I was on the panel that selected the scholars that would be studying and receiving scholarships for those years. During my time at the foundation, for all of the years that I was there, from 2020 to 2023, I worked alongside the other directors, and I observed the work of Dr. Fournier, who you've of course seen, and I hold her in the highest respect.
Me,
her
Dr.
work
Gibson,
was.
I apologize. You're just going to have to move the mic up a little bit. We're just a little bit more. No, it's got to go up. There, you should be okay there. That's where the test.
Thank you.
That's where the test took place.
Okay, how's that?
It should be better. Okay. So I did stop your time. You've got 3.5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So I did serve on those 2 panels and selected scholars from across Canada and elsewhere. The foundation is quite remarkable. The work of the foundation is amazing, and I want to comment on the leadership of Dr. Fournier, who led the foundation as the president and brought in a scientific cycle that was unique and allowed us to bring forward and celebrate PhD and doctoral students from across Canada and worldwide that are going to serve this country. All of the people who were selected in my cohort are now leaders across the country, and I expect the same of the scholars that will be being selected now. I saw no concerns in governance or leadership while Dr. Fournier was serving, and I do consider that there has been some effort to take her just create some sort of sense that she was not leading well. This was not the case in my experience. I left the foundation at the same time as Diane Adam and the other 7 colleagues that were involved. I also was involved in attempting to bring a motion forward to have conflict of interest declared of directors. And when I found that there was no path through and governance tangle and entanglement, I resigned. That's the end of my statement. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gibson. And I'd like to express on behalf of the committee our sincere condolences for your loss this week. And we do appreciate you being here under these circumstances, so thank you. Next, we have Madeleine Redfern. You have 5 minutes to address the committee. Please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Madeleine Redfern. I am an Inuk from South Baffin region of Nunavut. My work, past and present, is quite varied, stemming from business, law, politics, non-governmental organizations, both at the national, regional, and local level. That includes the Inspired Board, the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, previously on the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, and the Canadian Association of Innovation, Canadian Arctic Innovation Association, the Inuit Business Council, and more. Canada's national security matters. Our democratic institutions matter. My journey into security issues truly began when I was the mayor for Iqaluit. I did 2 terms for my Nunavut's capital city, and while I was mayor, I was confronted with a lot of security issues on a municipal, territorial, and national level. Security is a multi-layered issue in Canada's Arctic. For us Northerners, security issues is not just military or even just democracy. We have military infrastructure such as the forward operating location and military personnel in our communities. Within my first year as mayor, Telesat satellite went down. In Iqaluit and the entire northern part of Canada, from Yukon, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and the northern parts of the provinces from British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec, had no telecommunications services. No one could call in, no one could call out, internet was down, you couldn't pay for your groceries, gas, you couldn't go to the bank, you couldn't get money from the ATMs. Planes were grounded, except the few that had to, of course, fly due to medical reasons. Weeks prior to that, I had just read a report that stated that Canada's northern telecommunication systems was at risk and that the situation was so dire as it was deemed critical. Thankfully, Inuk F2 was able to be brought back online within 22 hours, but it heightened how vulnerable we are in the north when it comes to telecommunications. In our communities, we are also dealing with energy insecurity. Several of our power generations are well past their 40-year operating life. As mayor, my community faced regular power outages and power prices increased by 30% in those 2 years of my first term. The generators in some of our Nunavut communities have failed or been completely lost due to fire. In the dead of winter, where temperatures can go down to -50. This happened to Pangertung when it burnt down to the ground in the spring, by your standards, still winter. In Nunavut, we're dealing with over 80% of our water infrastructure in poor to bad condition, so much so that our communities cannot build the much-needed housing or other buildings until the water systems are fixed or replaced. My first water crisis happened in the first year of my term, when the water main broke in February. The city's senior administrative officer and the director of public works knocked on my door at 4 a.m. to inform me that despite best efforts for many hours, our staff and contractors were struggling to fix the broken pipe. They were standing in rushing wastewater in extremely cold temperatures, trying desperately to fix the pipe and save our precious water, since we rely on a small nearby lake for our water reservoir, and the water that we have in that lake in November has to last the entire winter and spring. Iqaluit is now in its 6th year of a local state of emergency because of the lack of inadequate water, and we're watching and living the collapse of our existing water infrastructure with continuous pipe breakages. Only 2 years ago, the city also faced an additional local state of emergency when our water was contaminated by fuel and the military was called in to assist. Our northern leaders must deal with security issues from the local level to the national level. That's part of the work we do. You learn quickly to adopt a security mindset. I established a pretty good relationship with the police force, the Canadian Rangers, and the military, including Joint Task Force North. I had to scale up my knowledge on disaster risk prevention and response. Most of our vulnerabilities and security threats come from inadequate government policies and the lack of appropriate investments in our community's infrastructure. What I also learned is this type and kind of infrastructure we need is the same of what is needed in the mines and by our military: telecommunications, energy, and transportation. I have made it my life's work to work on the intersection of sustainable development and security in the Arctic region, and to understand that transformative potential of new technologies. Unfortunately, too often, government policies, programs, and investment decisions for decades have contributed to our very real vulnerabilities, not just with respect to infrastructure, but also our economic vulnerabilities.
Ms. Redfern, we're 40 seconds over 5. I'm giving you extra time because the other witnesses were short. Can you conclude?
I will conclude. As mayor, I was offered free trips to China. I saw other Canadian leaders, business people, Indigenous municipal leaders take those free trips. I'm concerned about the dependence and implications of foreign investment, especially in critical infrastructure and critical mines. There remains fundamental risk to Canada's Arctic security due to government policies, funding programs, and inadequate investments, often made by transient or distant bureaucracy that put our national security at risk, even at the local level. We must do better.
Okay.
We need Canada to invest and seek to develop an Arctic strategy that attracts Canadian private sector and pension funds investment to redirect the billions of dollars that are invested in China into our north. We are a good investment.
Thank you, Ms. Redfern. One of the jobs I hate as committee chair is cutting people off, but we are dealing with a time crunch. For the benefit of the members, we're going to get through the first round. We should be able to get through 2 rounds of 5 and then 2.5, similar to the first panel. We're going to start with Mr. Barrett for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses, the 3 witnesses who've joined us today. Appreciate that it's an imposition, accepting the invitation of a committee with all that life has to offer, and of course echo the Chair's sympathies to our witness who's joining us online. Dr. Adam, I'd like to ask you about the March 20th information meeting of the board, where Mr. Alexandre Trudeau spoke about the donation, the $140,000 donation, and I'd like to know if Mr. Trudeau indicated his knowledge that the Chinese Cultural Industry Association was involved in that donation.
To, go back in time, but I do recall that he did speak to the fact that he was directly involved in that particular donation, and that he was aware of the implication of this association, but also the donors, because we had proof of that in the sense that there were photos of him with the particular donors. So that's what I can recall from that time.
Do you recall why there was a strong reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I can speak for myself. I think that's the best, because we were online, which is difficult to see the reactions, as you know. But I remember that, first of all, we had questions. I had questions as to why Mr. Trudeau signed the particular donation, because in fact it would have been normally, according to that policy, would be the CFO that should have done that. Let's say it was too close for comfort, in the sense that already we have the name of Trudeau in our foundation, even though it's public funds, even though it's this foundation is not partisan. But our current Prime Minister being also a son of Pierre Trudeau, and Alexandre also, in a context like that, I felt that we were in a situation where we had to mitigate the risk, because it's not the best position to be for a foundation to be perceived, as having issues like links with the political or the government. So I felt personally uncomfortable with that.
Are you aware of the existence of any recordings that contextualized fallout from this event that any members of the board were in possession of?
Recordings?
Yeah, recordings. No?
I'm not sure if that meeting was recorded, I must say.
Recordings of conversations following the meeting?
No.
No. Okay.
That meeting? No.
Thank you. Were there issues raised about Mr. Alexandre Trudeau's vacations with the to the Aga Khan's private estate in the subsequent fallout or follow-ups that occurred with the board?
At any meetings, this was never addressed.
Okay. What part did Carolyn Lynn play during the fallout of the board, becoming aware of this reporting in the Globe and Mail?
Okay, I can only say what I was told,
Yep.
okay, and also a couple of discussions I had with Mrs. Lynn, the CFO. Je vais parler en français, c'est peut-être un...
I'll speak in French if that's all right. It'll be a little easier for me, a little more natural. I know that Miss Lynn and Pascal Fournier were trying to rebuild history by looking at past files and examining exchanges in emails regarding that donation and with people who were no longer employed at the foundation. They examined the communications, and I was informed as VP that there had been messages or emails stating that there had been directives coming from a Chinese entity that was more or less telling them who receipts needed to be made out to regarding that donation.
I have about 30 seconds left. Would you say that the testimony of Ms. Lynn would be valuable if this committee were able to take it? Just a yes or no, if you could, please.
Oui.
Thank you very much.
Oui.
Yes, I believe so.
Over several times over multiple meetings, it was decided that Misters Johnson, Salas, and McNiven should recuse themselves because they were in a conflict of interest. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did they recuse themselves?
No.
And why wouldn't they recuse themselves?
Mr. Barrett?
Faudrait leur demander.
You'd have to ask them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Fergus, 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also like to thank the witnesses for being with us today. I would like to express my condolences to Dr. Gibson for that loss in her family. Mr. Chair, before I start my questions, I saw that Ms. Redfern had multiple pages that she wanted to share with us, and she didn't have enough time to do so. I would like to invite her to send it to the clerk so that we can read her comments in their entirety. Thank you for that.
To submit that to the committee, I think you may have already, actually. So we do have it. It's just a matter of it getting translated and distributed to the committee, Mr. Fergus. So I didn't take too much of your time away. You've got about 5.5 minutes right now. Go ahead.
Vous êtes très généreux. Merci.
You're very generous. Thank you. I am an admirer. I was an admirer of Dr. Adam when she was Commissioner of Official Languages. So I will be asking questions to all of the witnesses, but all my questions will be very brief, and hopefully you'll understand that it's just because I want to establish the facts. My first question is for Dr. Adam. Were you a member of the Foundation in 2014, 2015, 2016? As an administrator, no. I was a member of the Foundation. I was not an active member, not a board member, no.
At that time either? Dr. Gibson? Were you a member, same question, were you a member of the...
No, I was not at the time.
Okay.
I was a member, pardon me, by virtue of having been a scholar, but I was not a director
You
until
were not
2020.
a director at that time, okay. So
Correct.
If I could ask then, were you or any of you members of the board of directors during the time that the foundation negotiated and signed an agreement from Mr. Zhang? No. No? Okay.
See, Dr. Gibson is shaking her head no, so we'll take it as that.
Perfect.
Okay.
So none of you were there when the agreement was actually signed? Just to reconfirm. All right.
That's correct.
Were you selected as a member of the board before or after Madame Fournier became a president? Dr. Arda?
Pour moi, après.
For me, it was after.
For me, I was selected after she became the president.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson. Dr. Redfern? After? Okay. Was she involved in your selection as board members?
Je peux juste vous dire pour les...
I can just talk about procedures. It's the assembly of members, I think that's what they were called, who chose administrators of the foundation. And the assembly of members had about 20 people that are independent from the board. Some could be on both, but it's a structure similar to a university, one that is responsible for naming members of the board. And so it's not Miss Fournier who chooses or names board members. Did she support the process to develop or to propose the names of potential board members? I did not see that. It was the president of the board, Patrick, who contacted me. So I can't say. Perhaps my colleagues can give you more details.
Aware of the level of involvement that Pascal would have had in my being put forward. I found out much later that it was a different member who had put my name forward, so it was not her. But I don't know the level of involvement she would have had.
Thank you. Dr. Gibson?
Similarly, I think I was chosen in part because I was a scholar, and there was no scholar representation at the director level. So I believe I was chosen as a result of that. I don't know who put my name forward, or if Dr. Fournier was involved at all in supporting that. I was supported by the full board and was an active board member, and very happy to be there.
Members of the board when new members were being proposed to sit on the board? New directors? Est-ce que vous êtes les derniers?
Were you of the last named to the board? Or have you welcomed new members? I think that new members arrived after me. I arrived in 2020. The names are submitted to the board and recommended by the Assembly of Members. Thank you. In the preparation of these new members, is that part of Dr. Fournier's role? A brief response, please. I can't answer. It's micromanaging a little bit for governance. Thank you, Mr. Fergus.
Monsieur Villemure, vous avez...
Monsieur Villemure, you have 6 minutes. Thank you to our 3 witnesses. And like my colleagues, I would like to offer my condolences to Miss Gibson. Miss Adam, the foundation has different types of members. The family members, which I think is only Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Salas, Mr. Alexandre Trudeau, and I think there might have been another member, inaudible. There can be 6 government members, and I think there's 1, Mr. Brown. And I would like for us to specify the difference between administrators and members, because it can be a little confusing. there aren't any administrators beyond Mr. Salas, who represents the family. As VP of the board, you were aware of the committees, for example, the executive committee, the committee for naming candidates, as for any board. Audits, financing, investments. Yes. So on those committees, were the same people present, for example, Mr. McNimmon, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Alexandre Trudeau? I think you have the list of members. I never examined that in depth. I think Ms. Redfern was on a finance committee. I was on an executive committee and in committees linked to the mission of the institution. Would you say that the people that I named had a significant influence on the foundation? I would say yes. They are founding members. Some of them are founding members, and they've been there for over 20 years. Yeah, we have a timesheet here, and that's what we see, the same members who are there. Ms. Redfern, you were at the Finance and Investment Committee, and so you were responsible for investments and recruitment, correct? Were there any investments, foreign investments?
I understand that there were, and it's a question that I actually raised over a year ago when I was on that committee.
Okay.
Were there investments in China?
That is the question that I asked, and I got a response that we did have 2 Chinese company investments that represented 0.07% of the total investments. Mm-hmm. And
when you wanted to know more on foreign investments, did they work with you or did they make things difficult for you?
I definitely had some concerns around the possibility of Chinese investments, depending on where those investments were. The additional information that was provided to me is that one was with Tencent and one was Beidou, and I did Google them and saw that there were some concerns around those companies as it relates to the issue regarding privacy. Mm-hmm. The sort of, especially of those of the Chinese people, and I had a fulsome discussion with the members of the committee and the investment firm about how we invest, and was told that we have ECG principles that guide the investments, and that quite a lot of work had been done before my arrival to sort of help direct the firm on how we make investments.
La firme qui vous
That firm is Willis Tower Robson, correct? You mentioned Tencent and Baidu, 2 Chinese companies that have private subsidiaries and are known for their ties to the Chinese government. So if I summarize, there were investments in Chinese companies, and among them are Tencent and Baidu, correct?
D'accord.
Now, in the administration of investments, is it a difficult task?
Because, sorry, I missed the end of the question in my translation.
Did you find that you had a lot of freedom, or were you quite limited in what you could do?
Quand vous imposez des décisions.
There was always an environment where people on the committees or on the board were expected to be able to, freely ask their questions, to fulfill their duty, to get the information. But at the same time, as Dr. Adams said, we do need to be careful about getting to the point of micromanaging and being able to get the information, provide guidance, but not get to the point where the finance committee or the investment committee is dictating where those specific investments go.
dans les décisions finales.
I imagine that Mr. Johnson, Trudeau, Salas were pretty hands-on.
Beyond the committee, I'm not entirely sure how much more hands-on they were, but I can tell you that they were fully participating in the board meetings and the committee meetings, as were the other members.
Si M. Johnson...
If Mr. Johnson said that he was aware of nothing, is it reasonable to believe him?
Tout ce qu'on lui a posé.
With what? He said that he wasn't aware of anything whenever we asked him questions.
Just
rapid...
A quick response, please. I can't speak for him. I imagine you're talking about his testimony. But it would be unlikely that he's aware of nothing. I think that he's very aware of the foundation. He's been there for 20 years. Thank you. Thank you, Monsieur Villemeur.
We have Mr. Green next for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to allow Mr. Villemeur to finish his line of questioning. I found it to be pretty enlightening. Mr. Villemeur, do you have any other questions?
Monsieur Villemeur, avez-vous des...
Do you have any other questions? Mr. Green is offering you a bit of his time. Thank you very much to my colleague, Mr. Green. And Miss Adam. Or rather, I'll ask a question to all three. Was there a culture of not having any written proof that everything needs to be done orally? I don't know if I could say that it was a culture, but all of my positions were in public organizations, subject to the access to information legislation. We were very used to that. And as an academic, well, we like things being written. We like documenting our decisions. We like being able to go back and being able to consult them. And so I found that sometimes, and I stated this a couple times to the president, that I would have wanted briefing notes to be documented to see what the risks are. And the organization or the board was less inclined for that. I would have liked more complete notes that had information on the different risks. It was not part of common practice. And in my questions, I will be focusing on management and not the files. Is it possible that minutes were lost or edited? I couldn't say. Did the minutes include who was proposing and who was seconding? I believe so. Was governance optimal? I can try to answer, but I wouldn't mind if my colleagues were offered the opportunity. Ms. Redford?
On many different boards over the last 30 years, I was satisfied with the level of governance on the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation until we hit that crisis a couple months ago.
Donc, la gouvernance était bien jusqu'à cette crise, qui a d'ailleurs démontré que c'était peut-être pas si bien au fond, parce que...
So the governance was good until this crisis, which showed that maybe governance wasn't that great, since that was to be expected to a certain extent. Were there funds from the foundation that were used indirectly by Mr. Trudeau to fund his own projects?
Are you aware of anything like that? No, that's not part of your activities. Do you believe that people who needed to recuse themselves were possibly in a conflict of interest? I would invite Ms. Gibson to speak. Yes, I forgot because she was online.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I would just say that during similar to what Madeleine Redfern said, during the governance crisis, there was not a clear path through. There was a very confused and heated meeting that we never received minutes from. The meeting was extremely long. It was a 4-hour meeting. After that meeting, when we had asked the directors who were in a conflict of interest to recuse themselves, we thought we had a clear path through. There was a flood of emails, and those emails came from a group of people, a number of people who at every turn they struck down the path forward. So there was the suggestion that there be a lawyer be retained to advise. That was agreed on, but then the lawyer's background was called into question. Then there was a suggestion that there be that the folks that had been involved in the years in question recuse themselves. There was a flurry of emails about that. Then there was in-depth edits to motions that I put forward. All of this was a very heavy effort in the context of virtual communication. There was a boxing in of movement forward, and not a clear path for all of the directors to move collectively through. Draft motions asking people to recuse themselves were struck down. We tried to run those motions through a good process, but at each turn, as I said, these motions were struck down. And so at no point in the process did the directors from the years in question register a conflict of interest or move away from the decision-making process.
Est-ce que c'est ce genre de situation-là?
So that kind of situation, was it like that every time you received a donation, or was that the case only for the Chinese donation?
We only became aware of the Chinese donation by virtue of the president bringing it to the attention of the directors. So those that had knowledge of this previously had not brought that to the attention of the directors. And so the answer is that we weren't aware of it, and we shouldn't have been aware of individual donations like that. We were aware of them collectively, and the Finance Committee would have been looking at the nature of individual donations. But at the broader director level, we were not looking specifically at those sorts of matters.
Monsieur Trudeau,
Mr. Trudeau stated that they didn't ask people to recuse themselves because there was no need to do so.
He wasn't involved. Mr. Trudeau was not involved in the questions at the director level. There was motions asking directors to recuse themselves. So that's in fact, he was not involved in that level of governance, but it is in fact incorrect.
Okay, merci, Monsieur Villemur.
Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
Our first round, we are going to start, we're going to go 5-5, 2.5, 2.5, and then I have a question at the end. Mr. Barrett, go ahead for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Gibson, you moved the motion for recusal, that's correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Why?
I was aware that there was either a conflict of interest or a perception of conflict of interest that I spoke to the president about, the chair of the board, pardon me. And so I suggested that anyone who had been involved as a director or in those committees in those years in question should be recusing themselves in order to allow for independence. We needed to be able to independently review what had occurred and what had happened. We were requesting an independent review at the time.
And did they recuse themselves? Sorry?
They did. There was no recusal of individuals. There was a flurry and a constant engagement by people who were in a conflict, who were either in a conflict of interest or a perceived conflict of interest.
Could you succinctly offer a synopsis of their rationale for their refusal to recuse themselves?
There was no reason offered.
Have you seen evidence as to who I'm going to direct these questions to everyone on the panel if I can. Have you seen evidence as to who the actual donor of the $140,000 was? We'll start online with you, Doctor.
Just what was available in the Globe and Mail, and then what was said in meetings. So I think that's been clearly discussed at this committee level.
Okay, Dr. Adam.
There was always some confusion surrounding who were really the real donors, and that was part of the issue that we wanted to be audited. independently.
Okay, thank you. And you nodded in agreement, Ms. Redfern?
I don't believe that I could determine who the real donor was from the information provided, and that was on the basis that the foundation was having trouble returning the donation.
So, who might be able to provide us evidence of that? We've heard in relation to this, Ms. Farah Mohammed's name referenced repeatedly. Do you believe that she would be able to offer further information? Quickly, Ms. Redfern.
I didn't have enough information in my possession at any point in time to know who would actually know who the real donor was.
Dr. Adam, the same question with respect to Farah Mohammed.
Le seul moment où j'ai entendu ce nom.
The only time that I heard that name was in a communication from the president, Ms. Pascale Fournier, who mentioned that that member had stated that she knew the identity, but it's hearsay, in fact.
Dr. Gibson.
I'm not aware if she would have evidence or not.
Do you know what her role was, Dr. Gibson?
I do not. I believe that the CFO could be a good witness. The former CFO, Carolyn Lynn, could be a good witness on this, but she would have been looking back. She would not have been there at the time of the donation.
I'm going to ask each of the witnesses a yes or no question. Do you have additional documents that might assist us in our study, Dr. Gibson?
I provided all my documents to Madame Fournier because she had no access to documentation. So I provided everything and so she would have selected amongst that to provide that information forward.
Thank you. Dr. Adam, any documents? She indicated no. And Ms. Redfern? No. Okay, thank you. I think I've got less than 45 seconds, Chair. Are there additional witnesses with respect to this issue that this committee needs to hear from? If you don't have time to answer before my time is up, I'd invite you to please provide your response in writing. Ms. Redfern, names of additional witnesses? Dr. Adam.
Non, j'ai mentionné que Madame Lynn serait probablement.
I mentioned that Ms. Lynn would be a useful witness to clarify certain things.
15 seconds left. Dr. Gibson.
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barron. Just for the benefit of the committee, we did invite Caroline Lynn to the committee. We are in receipt of a letter from her lawyer indicating that she would not like to appear before the committee. We have copies of that letter in both official languages, and I will ask the clerk to distribute them to the members of the committee as well so that you have them. Okay? Ms. Sachs, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be sharing my time with my colleague, Ms. Hepner, today. Just first of all, thank you to all the witnesses who are joining us today. And I just want to be clear, and it can be a simple yes or no answer. So none of you who are here today were involved with the negotiations, the signing of the agreements, or accepting the donation from Mr. Benjang between 2014 and 2016. Dr. Gibson?
I was not.
Ms. Redfern, Dr. Redfern?
I was not.
Ms. Adam? I'm
No.
not hearing anything from the floor.
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we've established that. And we'll go a little further. If we can, the Right Honorable David Johnston, who is a member of the foundation, was he a board member at that time? Was he part of that process? To your knowledge, yes or no is fine.
Or Ted
I'm not aware.
Johnston.
I think Deanne may have information.
I just like we're referring to David Johnston or Ted Johnston?
David Johnston, the Right Honorable David Johnston.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
It was before my time.
Okay, that's fine. So thank you. So essentially, as this crisis that you've described came up, you were referring to documents and information that had been from 7 years prior, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so the same documents that we've also seen in committee and that have been reported elsewhere. So the frame of reference had nothing to do with your time on the board in making those decisions. It had to do with decisions made previous to your involvement in the administrative decision-making of the foundation.
That's correct. And we would not have had access to all of the information that we would have needed. That's why we're seeking an independent review.
Okay, so would you call this a foreign interference issue or a governance issue?
On that, the idea, exactly what Dr. Gibson said, the
Microphone, please.
What were the facts so that we could decide what it was, if the foundation had made any errors. The idea was to look into the issue and correct if there were issues to be corrected. So to pass judgment now would not be right. Okay, so c'était tout l'objectif.
It was the goal of an independent and exhaustive audit so that the current fiduciaries, because we were responsible of the foundation and that file. And that was the position of the directors and the administrators.
I understand. Okay. I think we were clear here that the board wanted to go in one direction, it couldn't go in another direction faced with that deadlock. That's why potentially you're here today. Chair, I don't have more questions. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Ms. Hefner, now to continue, if I may.
Minute and 40 seconds, Ms. Hefner. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to use this time to move a motion. I gave notice on May 16th, and members should have it in both official languages, that the deadline to submit witnesses for the study on the use of TikTok and its parent company, ByteDance Limited, be 3 days following the adoption of the motion, and that the committee hold one meeting before the end of June at the chair's discretion. I won't belabor the committee with further arguments on this. We've discussed it already at length. I know Mr. Green would like to expand the study to include other social media companies, and I agree. However, I don't think it's too much to ask for 1 day to get this study started with TikTok as the focus, and I hope the committee will quickly accept this motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hefner. The motion is in order and has been moved. We're just going to keep the witnesses there. Mr. Green, I see your hand. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, given that there's still 2 more speaking spots, I'm going to move to adjourn this debate.
Thank you. There's a motion to adjourn debate. It's not debatable. Do I have consensus to do that? No? Okay, Madam Clerk, will you take the vote, please?
Vote is that the debate on the motion moved by Ms. Hefner
be adjourned.
Be adjourned. Mr. Baines.
No.
Monsieur Fergus. No. Ms. Hefner.
No.
Madame Koudrakis.
No.
Ms. Sachs.
No.
Mr. Barrett.
I vote yes to adjourn debate.
Monsieur Gourde. Oui. Monsieur Muse.
Yes.
Monsieur Villemur.
Oui.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
5-5.
Okay, and I vote yes.
Yeas 6.
Okay, thank you. The motion is defeated. On va recommencer.
We're going to start again. 2.5 minutes. Mr. Villemur, the floor is yours. Thank you. We're hearing very different versions from Mr. Rosenberg, Johnson, and Trudeau, which is completely different from what we've heard from the witnesses today. We heard things that seemed hidden from Rosenberg, Johnson, and Trudeau. We heard that things were not necessarily written to satisfaction. There was governance shown when needed. Pascale Fournier talked about intimidation that she faced in resolving this conflict. Members did not want to recuse themselves in a conflict of interest or in the perception of a conflict of interest. We heard of fellows who had received an email saying that everything was fine, nothing had happened. And so I'm hearing from Rosenberg, Johnston, and Trudeau that all is well. And I'm hearing from former board members the opposite. Would you like to comment on this, Miss Adam, Miss Redford, and Miss Gibson?
On a juste 1 minute et demie, hein?
We only have 1.5 minutes, by the way. I'll speak for myself. I stepped down. I don't have a reputation of fleeing a sinking ship. If I chose to step down, as I wrote in my letter, it's because I couldn't trust that that file would be handled with transparency and integrity.
I chose to resign from the board due to the fact that we were losing our management. And as Ms. Gibson said, is, the value and the need to have an independent portion of the board handle it with an independent investigator to be able to assess the past facts and to figure out a path forward for the organization so that we could deal with this donation and then get back to the important work of the foundation, which is to support the PhD students.
Madame Gibson?
Quickly, please.
Thank you. Similar to what Deanne Adam just said, I also did not feel I could trust the governance any further, the leadership. I didn't feel there was transparency. I didn't feel there was integrity. And I felt that there was attacks on the former president that were not professional or kind.
Thank you. Thank you. Merci, Mr. Villemure.
Thank you, Mr. Villemure.
Minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Dr. Adam, I believe you said that you were concerned that the members who were appointed before 2018 could also be in a conflict of interest. Is that correct?
I didn't mention it, but I was contacted by lawyers, perhaps on March 23rd, and the president, DG, was there. Maybe it was before that, but they had concerns because Ted...
Opinion of concern?
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily a legal opinion because, and I'm not a lawyer, and I don't want to get stuck on words, but the lawyers called me and told me that there was a potential for a conflict of interest in that file with the president of the board and other members.
Minute left, so
Okay,
apologies. In Ms. Fournier's testimony, she stated that there was tension between the board because some board members, Bruce McNiven and Peter Salas, would attempt to make changes to the mandate of the investigation, while other board members wanted an independent process. Were those who were appointed to the board prior to 2018 should recuse themselves? Would you agree with her testimony?
Oui.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Gibson, in her testimony, Pascale Fournier stated that you circulated the motion. What was the pushback like from the board members in the scope of the...
There was pushback. I mean, as I said earlier, there was a heavy a number of emails that arose every single time I put something forward. So first of all, it was to destroy the reputation of the lawyer that we had selected. Secondly, to advise those to suggest that everybody that was in potential conflict of interest could stay until such a time as we had an agreement. And then there was in-depth destruction of the motions.
Last question. In your opinion, did at any point in time the notion of foreign interference come up, or the perception of of a foreign interference come up?
We weren't discussing that. We were discussing having an independent audit, and that's what we were focused on. So we were not discussing foreign interference.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I have a quick question for all three of you with a very quick response, if you don't mind. Madame Fournier appeared before this committee. I found her testimony compelling and credible. There were some witnesses that came afterwards that were less than favorable in their review of Ms. Fournier's performance as the executive director of the Trudeau Foundation. Quickly, on va commencer avec vous, Dr. Adam.
We'll start with you, Dr. Adam.
Describe Madame Fournier's performance as the executive director of the Trudeau Foundation in about 30 seconds or less.
Remarquable et exceptionnel.
Remarkable and exceptional.
Ms. Redfern?
I was always very impressed by her, and I saw no evidence of foreign interference in any of the work that we did.
Dr. Gibson?
I was always impressed with Dr. Fournier. She led the foundation very well. She had a very collegial relationship with all of the directors and was led the foundation into a completely different approach. She diversified who was accountable on the director at the level of directors. She diversified strategically and carefully, ensured that there was access for people who were from all ethnicities. She ensured that there was strong Indigenous engagement, and she broke down barriers to make sure that that diversity was in play. She was professional at all times.
And Dr. Gibson, one more question to you. Would you? I assumed you watched her testimony. Would you describe her version? Would you describe her version of the events as credible?
I found her testimony to be credible, and it aligned with my experience.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson. Thank you to all our witnesses for being here today. Thank you to our technicians, our analysts, our clerk. I am going to conclude this meeting. To our witnesses, on behalf of the committee and on behalf of our of Canadians, I want to thank you for being here. And again, Dr. Gibson, our sincere condolences. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.